So good morning, Commissioner Andor. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with Eurochild this morning. This is an important message that we will be giving to the annual conference of Eurochild. It's taking place in Örebro next week with 160 participants from 26 EU member states. And this is an important occasion for them to hear from you what is planned in the upcoming weeks and months in relation to the Europe 2020 strategy, and in particular the European Platform Against Poverty. Maybe just to say a few words about Eurochild, because we've been very happy to have the cooperation with the European Commission since 2005, and from that work have seen that the political attention given to child poverty has increased, and we hope that we've been influential in trying to show how important it is to look at children not as passive recipients of support, but rather as citizens in their own right. And that's a message that I think is increasingly being taken on board at European level. We have now members across 27 member states, 80 organisations. Some of them are national platforms, regional platforms with many hundreds of members. So you have a resource there that I hope you can use and capitalise on in the coming years to really help your agenda on making sure that social inclusion is at the heart of Europe 2020 and that we can address child poverty. So my question now is really to ask you, I know it's a very delicate time in the discussions about what the platform will look like, but maybe you can say a few words about how you see the Platform Against Poverty flagship taking shape and what that means for our work specifically on addressing child poverty and social exclusion.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to meet and send a message to the participants of this very important conference. I'm saying it's very important because we need to rely on NGOs increasingly in the future. I think these partnerships have been very good, but the Platform Against Poverty is also an initiative to strengthen this cooperation. I would like to underline three elements of the platform. One of them is to bring all the stakeholders into a new cooperation, to widen these circles, because it's clear that while we are making a historic step to elevate poverty reduction to the European level, because it never happened before to have a European level target about it. We also know that just through our own bureaucratic machinery, it will not succeed. We need an alliance between the European institutions, the member states and the NGO world, because otherwise we will not be able to deliver and monitor the progress. We also need to make a connection between the various policy areas, because it's not only about social inclusion, it's also about education, it's also about healthcare and several other issues, employment, and we need to coordinate these areas better in the future. So this is again going to be an exercise in policy coordination. We also need to line up the instruments we have, primarily the financial instruments. The EU has used various funds, especially the European Social Fund, for purposes that are related to poverty reduction or social cohesion. But we need to refocus these instruments, and the Platform Against Poverty will also provide a framework for doing that.
Thank you. And I mean, you talked a little bit about the stakeholder involvement and the importance to gather a broad partnership to achieve this agenda. But how do you think us as a network, both of NGOs, but also regional, local authorities, professionals committed to children's rights and children's welfare, how do we participate in the platform?
We only have one headline target about poverty, but we very well know that we have to focus specifically on children, on child poverty, because that's about Europe's future. That's about the next generation's well-being. That's about the employability of the next generation. If we allow certain groups of society, households to be marginalized and be socially excluded, then it just accumulates further risks for society, and Europe's future will be unpredictable, both economically but also socially. And also there is a related political risk as well. We shouldn't hide that. So if we want to be proactive and avoid such bad scenarios, I think we have to join forces in time and bring everyone into a dialogue, make it understood that it is important to tackle child poverty and make progress.
I take that also as an endorsement of the push we have that member states develop sub-targets specific to children and make sure that child poverty is retained as a specific objective of their work on social inclusion. You've also talked about the importance of coordination across policy areas, and for us, child poverty in particular cannot focus only on adequate resources. We're talking about health, education, and you said that the platform will be able to draw and coordinate on these different issues. Can you say any more words about how that will happen?
Of course, it's well known that the child's future is decided more or less until the age of 4 or 5. Of course, there are many developments later, but what happens in terms of health protection, education, early education, and providing a certain security for the children and comfort determines the rest of the life. And then if we ignore this, a whole generation can be put at risk. So that's why we have to start, for example, working on child health care from the start of pregnancy and pay a lot more attention than before. It is also connected with our work on demography, because it's well known that Europe is facing a huge demographic challenge, and that goes back to the security young families can provide to themselves and to their children. So we have many dimensions from which we have to look at this problem and focus also on early childhood education to strengthen the enrollment and strengthen the participation in primary education as early as possible.
Thank you. My last question is actually referring to some of the most vulnerable children in Europe. I mean, we often hear about the 20 million of children in the European Union who are at risk of poverty, which is a really dramatic and striking number. But it almost hides within that children who are facing extreme deprivation, and in fact doesn't include children who are not living in the family household because of the way the statistics are collected. What can you as the DG do to really ensure that the needs of these youngest children and the most vulnerable children are actually addressed?
Let me speak about two groups. One of them is a group that faces extreme deprivation because they come from minorities, immigrant minorities, or for example minorities like the Roma. In these cases, the issue is not only about incomes or providing healthcare, providing education and providing jobs for the parents, but also about cultural barriers. We have to break down these cultural barriers that isolate these communities from the mainstream society and very often prevent them from full participation in society, in the labor market, in education and elsewhere. And this is also a lot of work about communication and teaching not just the minority we speak about, but also the mainstream society. But then there are other children with a lot of disadvantages who come from orphanages or will spend part of their life, part of their early childhood without a family. And this is, of course, a major issue in a few member states. And we have had already some initiatives and work on deinstitutionalization, trying to secure that more and more children find families, find proper, responsible families for their upbringing and their life. Of course, this is a long-term policy, but we have to go down this way, because that's the solution which will provide a better outcome for the majority of these children. But also, of course, there are cases when it's just inevitable to maintain some institutions, but then they have to be adequately funded. We have to maintain a focus on social services, even in such difficult times when there is fiscal consolidation, some financial austerity, more or less, practically in every member state. We can still do our utmost to focus our efforts to maintain these important institutions for social benefits and social protection and social services in order to protect the most vulnerable groups and the most vulnerable children in our society.
Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good conference.